and welcome to the 19th episode of the Formula E Zone podcast. My name is Jack Jordan Maynard, and today we'll be reviewing the crazy Mexican E-Prix. But to be honest with you, I probably say that for every intro because most Formula E races are pretty frantic and crazy. But as always, joining me is Tobias Bloom from eForm LD.
Good morning. How are you?
Morning. Yes, it's the first time actually that we're recording this episode in the morning. It's very early in the morning. Obviously, there's a small time difference.
Yeah, the first pre-sunset podcast. I think
Yes.
not even the afternoon. I think every time we've done this, we didn't have any daylight because
No,
yeah.
it's always been in the evening, and today we decided to do it in the morning. It's nice, fresh, and the birds are still singing outside my window. And yeah, we're all quite sleepy as a result of it because we're like, oh, never up this early, which is a lie because we're both up much earlier than we have today. But we're still very sleepy.
Yeah, but that's just the general configuration of myself. I think I'm just generally sleepy. That's not a thing just because of this podcast. What are you usually getting up, Jack?
For the English viewers, I've got my English breakfast cup of tea ready. And I know we got a lot of viewers from America, so I know a lot of people in America drink English breakfast tea. Obviously, there's many different types of tea when you go to America. But yeah, we're all ready. We're all ready to discuss the Mexican E-Prix. Now, Tobias, it was just a general overview before we sort of get into the nitty-gritty of it. Another crazy race, but a crazy race for different reasons. It wasn't really shunts or crashes that we were talking about. It was more good old-fashioned racing.
Yeah, it wasn't not your usual chaotic FE race. It was, still plenty of things happened, and there's still so much to talk about in this episode, but still, there weren't really these monstrous crashes or people just absolutely losing it and crashing into each other. It was a relatively, I wouldn't say tame race compared to FE standards, but did they behave themselves? um, and
Yeah, it wasn't a Santiago E-Prix where everyone was just bashing into each other within the first minute of the race.
yeah, and still we saw a lot of action on track. We saw a dominant drive at the front. I really enjoyed that.
No, it was a great race. It felt like a normal race. It did have its lull periods in the middle, but you just know, even when Formula E have lull periods in the middle, and it's happened a few occasions, when this happens, you know something crazy is going to happen at the end. And there was some things that happened at the end of the race, which we'll discuss, which was just beyond belief in a sense, because they came from drivers that you wouldn't expect to make some sort of errors. So yeah, but we'll move on to that very well in the near future over the next hour. Now, before we talk about qualifying, I think that one of the main talking points we should talk about is Daniel Abt, actually, because obviously in free practice 1, Daniel Abt had an accident going into turn 9 where he locked up massively, had a software glitch. There is some sort of rumour going around that it was immediately after he did fan boost, and that obviously then came up in the race again, which we'll talk about. But obviously, he went slamming. The car didn't slow down at all, straight into the wall. He said it was one of the biggest impacts he's ever had in his racing career. He was taken to hospital, and obviously then missed FP2 in qualifying, but was cleared for the race. Tobias, to tell you what, I gotta give my hats off to him, because to miss all that track time and then come in a race where you've missed all that track time, everyone else is pretty much prepared. You've been taken out of the environment of a racing and being in a hospital and then come back to race. I think that's a good achievement just to make it to the start line.
Absolutely, yeah, and especially if you look at what happened to him that day. Nothing. He didn't break any bones or anything, but still, after a 21G impact, another sensor on the car apparently read 29Gs. If you just take the 21Gs and calculate how heavy he would have been when he hit the wall, 1.8 tons. So imagine smashing into the wall at 200 kilometers an hour, which is about 120 miles an hour, weighing the equivalent of 1 point something tons. I think 1.8 it was. Yeah, and apparently another sensor read 29 Gs. He himself said 20, 30 years ago, I would have lost my legs. He didn't destroy the monocoque, luckily. But he didn't pierce anything or nothing moved, but the monocoque cracked. Yeah, he had to be extricated from the car, which is standard procedure. So if you have an accident north of, I'm not sure about the number in F1, it's 18G, then you have to be extricated by a specially trained medical team, and they lift you out of the car, still in your seat. They put you onto the stretcher, into the ambulance. You go to the Trackside Medical Center, and in Daniel's case, he had to be airlifted to a hospital, not because of any severe injuries, but because, well, that's just the quickest way to get around in Mexico. He had to go to the hospital, and the quickest way to get to the hospital, or to get anywhere pretty much in Mexico, is to take a chopper. Yeah, so he was there, missed FP2, missed qualifying, and then came back. Of course, with some serious bruises, and moved one or two vertebrae, and yeah, it wasn't like he was not hurt, and apparently he still was in pain getting home. He's being treated by doctors in Germany now. So the impact itself must have been really painful. Credit to the team also for rebuilding the car in such a quick time. They pretty much rebuilt an entire FE car in about an hour. So yeah, for Daniel it was important to show some team spirit, he said, and not do it for himself, but also do it for the team to participate in the race. He said it was clear that if he didn't feel well, he would abort the race and come back home to the pits, and just don't finish, which is what he did, in fact. After a spin late in the race, far outside the top 10, he said, well, where's the point? And decided to put himself and his health over a top 14 result at best. That's what his weekend was in a nutshell. Scary accident.
Yeah, for sure. Like I was a bit confused at the beginning because obviously he's had the accident, and obviously like most of these tracks, even at FE standards, but especially Mexico, would have had a decent medical facility. But so at the time when the accident happened, and I heard he went to hospital, I was like, normally these things are covered by the actual on-track medical center, because the on-track medical center is not like it's a little it's like a mini hospital within a track. Like they've got so much sort of materials and things that they would need to even like resuscitate a driver. So I was surprised initially that he went to hospital, but then when I was reading the extent of the stuff, and it was basically just to double check, make sure, and send him to people who could take better care and monitor him more, because at the time I thought it could have been covered in the medical center, but as you described the injuries, which I later found out, it probably was serious enough to go to hospital.
Yep. He suspended a vertebrae. That's the word I was looking for earlier.
Yeah. So from that made sense for him to, I think you should go to the hospital and have it and like a proper X-ray done and
MRI scans and all that. Yeah.
Yeah, and make sure. So it did make sense afterwards. Obviously at the time I didn't know that he had like suspended his vertebrae, but because it hadn't come out. So because we just heard he's gone to hospital, and I was like, okay, that's pretty serious, because normally these sort of, like, he was able to get out of the car by himself. It's not, it's not one of those where the driver's telling you he's fine and is okay. It's rare for them then to go to the hospital.
Yep.
So because they're normally covered by the medical facilities. But great job from everyone involved. I'm glad Daniel's okay. And I suppose we can move on. Obviously, difficult race for him.
Get well soon,
but
Daniel.
In terms of qualifying, but in terms of qualifying, I want to mention Porsche. Obviously, they managed to get their first pole position. Okay, so it was Andre Lotterer. Great, he did really well to get it into Superpole. Was second fastest overall in the group standings, but then put in a mega lap to give Porsche their first pole. What do you make of that? Because obviously Porsche, being a new team alongside Mercedes, probably not been as consistent as Mercedes so far at the start of the season. But they've shown glimpses, and I think that was another glimpse of performance from Andre Lotterer and Porsche in Mexico.
Yeah, I'm really not sure what to think about Porsche. They, sometimes, They are one of the two, maybe three strongest team out there, and sometimes they're at best a top 10 contender. Now you have to, of course, exclude Neil Jani because he was in his fifth FE race, and the first two were in 2017. So technically his oh no his sixth, and two of them were 3 years ago. So technically in his fourth Formula E race with Porsche, and he of course is still getting used to the car. So we kind of have to exclude him. And only look at Andre Lotterer. And we know he's quick, and he's shown that. But of course, a driver always has to rely on the material he's given. And I have no idea how good Porsche's material is. They seem to have a decent car, obviously. Otherwise, he wouldn't have finished on the podium in Diriyah or been on pole in Mexico, but in the race, it seems like he's still lacking a bit of pace. And of course, that's to be expected. Porsche is in its first Formula E season. They have practically no experience whatsoever with electric race cars. They, of course, have some hybrid experience from WEC, but nevertheless, they are still learning, and the learning curve is just like for Neil Jani, very steep for Porsche. And it's surprising that they are so competitive from my point of view. Still, I have no idea how and where to put them on sort of the performance range FE in its sixth season currently has. Porsche is currently P9 of 12th in the team standings. I think they deserve to be up a little more in the standings, but just in a very subjective assessment, they could be up more and further in the team standings. However, I have no idea whether Porsche is actually better than Nissan or worse than Nissan. Mercedes, on the other hand, is ranking third, and I don't think Mercedes is that much quicker than Porsche. Really, I have no idea where to put Porsche and what to think about them. We're now coming to the fifth race of the season, and I still don't really have a grasp on, and I don't think anyone has a real grasp on how well Porsche will be performing in the last two-thirds of the season. Yeah, interesting topic to look at, but it's really, really difficult to sort of put Porsche anywhere in any sort of team's ranking.
Yeah, it's very up and down. Like as you said, like the form has been up and down, and it's really hard to grasp like where they are. But what I thought was interesting, obviously, you mentioned Neil Yarni with him being early in the race in his career in terms of Formula E, and so is James Collado because Mitch Evans who was fastest in the group qualifying, ended up finishing second overall in qualifying. You know, you've got Lotterer and Evans, who obviously have got a massive amount of now experience in Formula E, and they've got two rookie teammates essentially in terms of Neil Jani and James Collado, and obviously they're struggling compared to the two main drivers. And I think for a team, it must be really difficult, and it must be difficult for these drivers. And I know because you say like, oh, they're in their beginning, they're in the early stages of their Formula E career, and I know driving a Formula E car is so different. But when does it become a time when you, as a driver like Collado or Neil Yarni, if you see Andre Lotterer and Mitch Evans qualifying consistently towards the front end, and you're in the tail end of the field, like before you've even got going, that's got to knock your confidence back straight
It's
away.
frustrating, yeah. Especially I think for Neil Jani because we know, and I think he knows as well how good of a driver he is. If everything comes together, Neil Jani, at least a couple of years ago, was one of the best racing drivers in the world, and I don't think he lost any talent in the meantime. Neil Jani can be very quick. He's a rapid driver usually, but he's getting used to FE and having a teammate like Andre, who of course knows FE inside out. that has to be frustrating for him. And it's, I think, not the easiest task to, yeah, keep your composure in moments like these. When you see your teammate being able to finish second in the first race of the season, to, yeah, put the car on pole if everything comes together, and you're fighting for a top 15 result, Neil Jani being now one of only four drivers who still haven't scored a point, alongside Nico Müller, the other Swiss, and both Niers. Um, yeah, it has to be frustrating, of course, but there's nothing he can do apart from continue on learning and waiting for his time, sort of. I don't think, interestingly enough, the situation with Collado is comparable, because James has been able to regularly driving to the points already. He has 10 points on the board. He was supposed to have put two more onto it in Mexico. He finished ninth, but was disqualified later on for yeah, using too much energy.
He using too much power,
Yeah,
yeah, or
yeah,
energy, yeah.
he we had a safety car in the first phase of the race, and that meant an energy deduction of 5 kWh, and he used more than the now allowed 47 kilowatt hours. So that's why he was disqualified. Had it not been for that, he still would have been 15th in the championship. His results are better than Neil Jani's. As I said, it's not, maybe not really comparable, but it maybe is. Yeah, he's just luckier than Neil Jani now, looking at it. Evans winning a race, being on the podium for a second consecutive time, and Collado only just being able to finish inside the points. Of course, that's frustrating, but that's what any FE driver went through at the beginning of their careers. And I'm always a fan of giving drivers time to adapt, and then, yeah, evaluate their performance halfway through a year, or maybe going into the last couple of races, or maybe after the season, although that's maybe too late for the teams to change anything. But I just give both James Collado and Neil Jani some more time before, yeah, really looking at their performance.
Because I wonder now how long teams will wait, because the championship's so competitive now. Like I understood at the time, like it's so new. It is so new, this championship, and it's a completely different driving style. It's completely different techniques that you've got to learn in terms of the regen. But you've seen drivers like Pascal Wehrlein, Oliver Rowland, who Felix Rosenquist. I know that was maybe a bit earlier in the time frame, but who have just jumped in the car and been quick, and have got on with it and done a job straight away. And you get drivers a bit like Gary Paffett last season, who just struggled, like Brendan Hartley. These are really good drivers, and they're struggling to get the ball moving. And Gary Paffett was ousted by HWA, wasn't kept on for Mercedes this season, and you're just wondering, well, if they can't be competitive by the mid-season, if they can't manage to work it out, then I can see teams beginning to look elsewhere for drivers. And you're only going to get one season. You're not going to get the 2 seasons to try and, okay, you've had your season to get used to it. Here's your second season. This is where it's like a quarterback in NFL, right? Where you get your rookie year, where you learn, and in your second season you're expected to perform. Whereas in Formula E, I don't think there's that time anymore. Essentially, for a second driver who's new to the series, you want them in a couple of races to be then getting closer and closer to your teammate.
I think in Neffy, it's similar. If you look at Jaguar last year, or the last 2 years, they gave Nelson Piquet Jr. 2 years. He did season 4 with them, was reasonably successful in the first half of the year, but after, well, being, where did he finish before the Punta E-Prix? He finished, let me just look that up. Ah, Mexico, haha, yeah. He finished fourth in season 4 in Mexico. And after that, nothing really good came out of his side of the garage. So that's why they, yeah, sacked him halfway through last year. So they gave him a second season, and I think that's what Porsche will be doing as well. Not sacking Neil Jani, of course, but giving him a second season. They're playing a longer game than just looking at and evaluating drivers for half a year and then replacing them. Remember, next year Formula E will become a world championship, and then it might be an advantage for Porsche to have drivers in their car who are a little bit more experienced than a rookie would be. So when FE becomes a world championship, and that's pretty much when it really matters for Porsche, um, they have two drivers with experience in the car and get going, hit the ground running straight away in the first race of the new year. I think that's what they're aiming for. So giving him the time now, giving Newjan the time now, and then approaching season 7, the first year of FE being a world championship with two reasonably experienced drivers. I think that's what they're going for.
Yeah, for sure. Well, it's going to have to be a wait and see process because as I think time, I think it'll just be interesting to see if time is now running out on drivers, especially as you said when we go to a world championship, the stakes are slightly higher. Um, so it'll be interesting to see how long teams will wait around because Porsche they've got such a wealth of drivers in their program, so they can pick and choose whoever, and it'd be interesting to see who comes out, who could be a really good single seater driver, and who might come out if one of them's not performing, and who could actually step in and do a good job. So before we just wrap up qualifying, I just wanted to, we haven't really talked about qualifying much. We've just talked about the impacts of it. But at the same time, I want to give a massive shout out to Mahindra. Obviously, the gearbox failures or gearbox problems that they had before the start of shakedown, they had to change a component within the gearbox, both. So that meant a 40 place grid penalties for both Verline and both D'Ambrosio. So which effectively meant they had to start the race from the back, but qualifying was still important for them. It wasn't like, in F1 where, you might just get to Q2 and then you stop and then you're like, okay, there's no point. It was important because it actually affected the extra penalty they would have got during the race. So, for example, Verline managed to qualify P4 in total, but I think moved up to P3. No, he qualified P3, apologies. He did qualify P3, but so that meant he had a drive-through penalty for the race, less of a penalty than D'Ambrosio, who was in the middle of the pack, who then had to have a 10-second stop-go. So credit to Verline, a great qualifying from him.
Absolutely, yeah. It didn't look very well going into the weekend. You talked about them having to effectively not. I mean, they didn't replace the gearboxes, but for the FIA, who only saw, well, they broke a seal, they must have changed the gearboxes. That's an immediate 20 place grid job. And if you do that on both of your cars, uh, as a driver, on both of your available gearboxes, both sides of the garage, that's 40 places backwards each for both drivers. Yeah, so the situation going into the weekend didn't look too great for them. But then coming out and spoiler alert, finishing in the top 10 even after these really harsh penalties. Yeah, it's a good achievement, and really these points might come in handy come the end of the year. We've seen 1 or 2 points, yeah, being deciding between I don't know, 9 and 8 in the championship standings, and that of course is relevant for prize money as well. So yeah, really really good effort by both drivers to finish inside the top 10 after these penalties.
Yep, for sure. And the only other main talking points that come out of qualifying before we get onto the race is, the Group 1 sort of struggle bus in terms of BMW and Lucas Di Grassi. BMW really struggled. They've had such a good start to the season, and both Gunther and Sims just weren't able to put a lap together on a track where it is Mexico. It is a normal racing circuit, so you would expect it to be fairly rubbered in with like quotes, air mark quotes. But not to be as dirty as the likes of Santiago and Diriyah. It is an actual circuit. So I was quite surprised to see him not actually sort of progress like Sam Bird did, or at least be in the top 10. They were like down in, I think it was in 18th and 20th, like for BMW, which was a big shock.
It was a big shock, yeah, especially if you look at where they finished beforehand. Now Sims being able to be on pole position for both of the Diriyah races, Max Gunther winning Santiago, Sims winning the Saturday race in Diriyah. It was a bit of a surprise, the lack of pace in at BMW in qualifying. Um, but in the end of the day, I think that also has to be down to qualifying. Of course, it wasn't as dusty as we've seen in Santiago, but still being in qualifying groups 1 and 2, if I'm not completely mistaken. Um, where did yeah both in group one? Yeah, actually
Both were in
both were in
Group
group
1,
one,
yeah.
and that made a difference. I think. But that's how things are in FE, and you have to progress then from the top. I don't know, from 15th to the points, or 20th on the point
Yeah.
to the points. Yeah, fair play. That's just how things are.
It is. Well, obviously, Bird showed, as we said, mentioned right at the start, where he managed to make it through to Superpole with, despite still being in Group 1. So it was
It was
doable.
doable. Yeah.
So a better quality. You don't have to all get into Super Bowl, but you've got a better chance of maybe being in the top 10 or in the middle of the pack. Which, okay, still not great, but at the same time, you're not fighting right at the rear. But that's pretty much it for the sort of the qualifying. So I think it's time to get on to the race. I just run down. So we had Lotterer, who managed to get on pole for Porsche. Evans was P2. Verline was P3, but obviously was demoted down to the back of the grid, so that promoted De Vries to third. And we had Buemi, who qualified fifth, but then started fourth, and then Bird, who qualified sixth, but then moved on into P5. So let's talk about the start of the race, because it's always just as dramatic as anything else in Formula E. It was a clean start, I suppose, from the whole field, but it got juicy because Mitch Evans got a really good run, had the inside line, going into turn one, so we was able to, the racing, Lotterer was on the racing line, but because Evans was on the inside, he was able to pretty much, it was a bit aggressive, but he sort of locked up, but he managed to squeeze through, he managed to push Lotterer out wide. It was a bit of an aggressive move, but Tobias, what do you think? He sort of managed to get through. Evans then went on to lead the race. Lotterer was out on the grass and fell back to fourth.
Firm, decisive, but still fair. I feel like it was a fair maneuver in the end. Of course, I don't think Andre was happy about it. Being shoved off track in turn one when you're when you're trying to defend P1 ain't great. But still, I think at the end of the day, all things considered, it is a tough but fair maneuver. Or it was a tough but fair maneuver. Um, we've seen
We've seen
we've seen
worse.
worse. That's right, and we've seen similar from Evans. Even Andre's seen similar from Evans. If you think back to Rome 2019, both were in the same sort of situation. Lotterer starting on pole, Evans second, both jostling for position, and then Evans just sends one up the inside. In Rome, it was up the inside of the chicane before the start straight. Um, I think these two overtakes were comparable. Of course, the layout of the turn and the corner was different. Still, Rome was just as firm is maybe the best word for it as in Mexico. So yeah, I think the overtake was still in the frame of being good and being not maybe clean. Clean isn't a good word for that as well, but yeah, still fair. Not clean, but still fair.
Yeah, I'd have to agree. Like as I said, we've seen worse, and I'm remembering back now to that overtake with Lotterer and Evans back. It was aggressive again. Evans nearly pushed him into the wall. I remember talking to Evans after that race, and he was praying that he got out, and he didn't hit the wall because then he knew it was okay. But as I said, we've seen way more aggressive moves. Even think back to the last race with the Costa on Gunther, like that was just completely banzai, and like Gunther literally had to come to a stop. So it wasn't on that level. So to me, it was an okay move. There was nothing wrong with it. It was just hard racing in a sense. But that's where it sort of started to curtail for Lotterer, because then he fell back to fourth. He did try to pass Buemi. I think it was definitely De Vries and Buemi who managed to get through. And from there on, he managed to fall back. Okay, he managed to fall back because then he was attacked by both Virgins. From Franz and Bird managed to get past him. I think De Vries had also fallen back at this stage as well during the race, because then I think De Vries managed to get through. Because obviously in the Mercedes it's quick, but at the same time it's not. Its race pace seems to be struggling at the precise moment. But then Lotterer hit the Mercedes and he broke his front wing, and that was basically the end, because it was sparking very similar to Jean-Eric Vergne's back in Santiago, where it sort of just came loose and was scraping across the floor, causing a massive plume of smoke, just like Vergne's. And again, Lotterer decided, not to pit. They don't pit on that first lap when it's still smoking. And, he carried on and he went on that pit straight, and we were like, what are you doing? And it failed. Basically, it failed on that pit straight because the puncture, it was sparked, he locked up massively, couldn't stop, was on the grass, I think. So I just didn't understand why drivers, they have a damaged car, but they decide, I'm going to continue, in that hope that they can just get the part off so they can carry on racing.
And we've seen it happen, getting the part off. Sort of a comical scene, but if you think back to Pascal Wehrlein, he was able to do it in Diriyah. He had a damaged front wing and managed to bump and scrape it off in turn, I don't even remember the turn, I think between turns 20 and 21 or whatever that was.
Yeah, he was definitely banging it after the chicane where the start straight is. He's before the final corner on to the start straight.
And he managed to get the part off and the piece off. And that's what drivers are trying as well. Van did that in Santiago. He blocked his teammate in doing so, but still, he tried to knock it off. And Lotterer tried to do the same. Ultimately, he managed to do it as well. He lost it on the grass exiting turn one, but still his race was done as soon as the piece was sort of flapping around after the early contact with a Mercedes, I think. Not much to take away from that race apart from lots of frustration, some more work to do. I'm sure he's still smiling and happy about his pole run and his lap, because that really was watchable. And if you get a chance, go and rewatch his pole lap. That really was enjoyable. Still, that maybe was the only good thing he he experienced over the weekend. Really frustrating, and to this day, I think.
Yeah, because I remember like Porsche after the race, they were like, yeah, we've got to analyse how we've not come away with points, from this race. And to be fair, once the race sort of unravelled after those first couple of laps, because it was fairly early on, it was clear that Lotterer was never going to be able to run at the front. Like, yes, they were able to get the qualifying lap, they were able to get on pole, but the pace was just not there. He was there at the start, but he fell back, and the two in front managed to just move away effectively. And yeah, he was just stuck, and he was going backwards a little bit. So a disappointing race for Porsche, and obviously a race that provided so much hope with the pole position ended up crashing and burning. So a lot for them to learn and come back in time for Marrakesh, but see what they can do in time for Marrakesh in a couple of weeks' time. Moving on then, so obviously we managed to get the first safety car. So the first safety car was caused, again, a couple of laps in, slightly before the Lotterer incident. But we had Nico Müller trying to overtake Nick De Vries, who was, as I said, beginning to fall back at this stage. And, he just got it wrong out on the outside of turn one, went out wide, got on the sort of the dust and the marbles, and went straight into the wall. Now, that was brilliant for the Mahindra team, because remembering to the start of the podcast, they had to take those extra penalties, the stop-go and the drive-through. That completely negated that because they'd already taken it, allowed them to catch right back up, so they were back in the race. But safety car, Muller's incident, what do you think, Tobias?
Muller's incident, oh, yeah, frustrating for him. Being able to run up so far on the order. That really it looked good for Dragon. Because usually you would expect Dragon to be rather towards the back of the top 10. Um, not being a regular point scorer, and Muller being able to attack for P5, that's a good achievement already. Um, yeah, at the end it was just a driver error. I'm afraid locked up going into turn one, and yeah, missed the apex by a meter, and that 1 meter is missing at the outside and at the exit of the corner, and that's how he ended up in the wall. As you say, for Mahindra, it was great. They served their drive-through um, slash 10-second stop-go penalty before that happened, and they weren't lapped. In fact, it seemed to be reasonably close for being lapped. Not for Wehrlein with this drive-through, but for D'Ambrosio, who served the 10-second stop-go penalty. Um, that could have been close at a later stage of the race to being lapped, but they weren't. And so when the safety car came out to clear Muller's car off circuit, they were able to close up back to yeah the back end of the field and yeah come back into contention for the race.
Which then led for them, as we said earlier, getting those points because obviously it went on to be quite a race of attrition from here on in because obviously we've already got Muller out, we've got Lotterer out, so some of the drivers are already out this race, and we've only done a couple of laps, so and it did fall into a race of attrition for sure. So I suppose what was interesting then is what I want to talk about is obviously Bird managed to make his way through, so he managed to work his way up to second, passing Buemi, who was in third, and then the DS Techeetahs, again, not the greatest qualifying session, obviously not helped by their qualifying groups obviously being towards the front. So they're trying to make their way forward. And so at this point of the race, it was Evans, Bird, Buemi, and then you had the two DS Techeetah cars. And then again, their strategy was just a bit odd because Da Costa is flying at the moment in that car. And at the time, he was ahead of Jean-Eric Verne. And he was chasing Da Costa, but I think there was Verne was in attack mode before Da Costa because it made sense for Verne to go into attack mode before Da Costa because he had such a massive gap behind him. So, and then they decided to switch, but before they switched, Da Costa took attack mode, and then so now they're both in attack mode, but Verne has allowed Da Costa through, surprisingly, to be honest with you, down turn one, but did follow the team's orders. But then on that same lap of letting him past, back at turn 9, Da Costa's through again. He's overtaken him. And in that time, they've managed to lose they were right behind Sebastian Buemi at this point. They were racing Sebastian Buemi for third. Buemi's 3 seconds down the road because they've been wasting time squabbling with each other. I didn't understand it. What did you make of it?
What Ferrari's F1 strategists are in F1, that's Techeetah. Just team orders in FE, I think. They seem to find a way to mess team orders up every time they're out on track. Disaster for them. Similar things happened in the last race in Santiago, with them trying to swap positions and then deciding, well, I think it's better to swap back. They did that in Mexico as well. I just don't get it. Da Costa was cleared to quote, "You can race with Jeff." After they swapped positions. And after only a few meters, he realized that he is a lot quicker than Jeff. And all the while, Buemi, of course, who was racing in front of them, just disappeared into the distance. It cost them so much time. Also, there's, of course, this psychological component to it. Jeff never really had a teammate who was challenging him for yeah, we have to talk about the number one driver role in that context. He had obviously Marchinqua, who wasn't able to do anything against well, anyone, but particular in this case, Verne. He had Stefan Zarazan, who was a good driver, and on a good day, he was able to be a regular point to top five scorer. He won a couple of races. Um, was disqualified from London season one, for example.
Yeah, I remember that.
So Sarazan is a good driver, but still he wasn't able to challenge Jeff. And then, of course, there was one more driver, Esteban Gutierrez.
Esteban Gutierrez, yeah.
Yeah, how about him?
But again, it was like one of those. If we're going back to the rookie thing, aren't we? Like he only had a couple races, like, and he wasn't atrocious. He just wasn't ready.
That's
Like
right, yeah.
he fell into the category of the Gary Paffitts of this world, sadly. Who were, Esteban Gutierrez is a good driver, but at the same time, he made it to Formula One. He can't be
I
that
think
bad.
so too, yeah.
So something like Gary Paffett, he's won two DTM championships. Like he's not a bad driver. It's just for whatever reason you go to Formula E. It's not just plug in and play. It's so different, as we were saying earlier. So for some drivers it clicks, or for some drivers it doesn't. It didn't really click for him in his 3 or 4 races. Really, it wasn't that long that he had in the
Yeah.
car.
And then, of course, Jeff had Lotterer as a teammate for the best part of these last few years. And Lotterer was able to challenge him, but not challenge him for the number one driver sort of role within the team. Um, it wasn't like Lotterer wasn't allowed to win, but in if they were racing half a second apart with a 20-second gap to the next best driver in third, I think Jeff would have had the priority to win. That's just how things are. Remember, Jeff owns part of the team. It's his baby really, and he's helped building the team, and he knows every process inside out, and overlooks not everything, but he knows how things are going at Techeetah. And yeah, Lotterer was a teammate. He was able to challenge him, but I don't think he was able to sort of. He wasn't allowed to.
Consistently
Yeah,
beat him.
that's right, and that's why Jeff's throne of being number one at the team was never really in any jeopardy. Maybe one of the reasons why Lotterer moved to Porsche over the summer. On a side note,
Which allowed him to become a number
yeah,
one, which is what's happening at this precise moment.
absolutely, yeah. And now Jeff has Antonio Felix da Costa as a teammate, who is an outstanding, exceptional driver, a real talent. And yeah, Da Costa is able to challenge him for that throne within the team. And of course, Jeff doesn't like that. And we have to ask the question of who will be number one driver come the end of the year. It sort of feels a bit like, although the circumstances were completely different, Vettel versus Webber a couple of years ago in F1, both being able to beat the teammate on a good day. It's fun, of course, to watch from the outside, but I think from the inside for the team, I mean, I don't want to be the one making decisions about the team orders. Mark Preston, team principal at the Techeetah, does have one of the toughest jobs, I think, in the championship, um, because both drivers are just so ambitious, and they have the car to become champion, and they of course both want to be champion, and to first driver you have to beat is your teammate, and yeah, that's what both Antonio Felix da Costa and John Eric Verne are trying: beat their teammate. And now you put the team order component into it, it's just a really messy. It just leads to really messy situations, like we've seen in Santiago, like we've seen in Mexico. It'll be interesting to look at this for the next couple of races. Yeah, I just don't get why Techeetah always try to influence things they maybe shouldn't influence. It was clear that Antonio Felix da Costa had better pace after the old swapperoo, and yeah, I don't know. He was able to reel in Buemi relatively quickly. Cynically, you could argue that had it not been for the team order, he would have even challenged for the win. In fact, after they figured out who's driving ahead of the other, uh, Felix da Costa was half a second quicker than Mitch Evans on average on a lap. That would have still meant he would have needed, I don't know, 5 more laps to really come into striking distance. And then
Yeah,
you also have to keep in mind that Evans surely wasn't, yeah, giving it his all, and he could have picked up the pace, I think, relatively easily as well. So just don't nail me down on these 5 laps, but Felix da
in
Costa could
hypothetical
have been
terms.
able to compete for victory. Cynically, you could argue that. However, I think the reason for him not being able to challenge for the win is more down to him only qualifying in 10th. And yeah, if he manages to, that's my last note, if he manages to get his qualifying back to, I don't know, the Super Bowl shooter. Maybe that would be good for him
Yeah,
if he can qualify farther up the grid. He's on any day a challenger for victory. If he qualifies within the top 5, let's say, for Marrakesh, he has to be one of the top picks for victory there.
yeah. I was gonna say like the way he started this season. Yeah, you're right. Qualifying has been his issue. Like he hasn't nailed a qualifying lap yet, and he's you know he's come back in even in Santiago to when he came from like 10th on the grid. Like so, you're already putting yourself at a disadvantage, and you've if you've got the pace to challenge from 10th and get all the way to the front. And I agree with you. I feel like hypothetically, Da Costa could have won that race. Maybe not won it, but it definitely could have been second and maybe mounting a charge towards Mitch Evans in the latter stages of the race because he had the pace. He passed as soon as he passed Verne, as soon as that debacle was over. It was on Buemi, he passed him, see you later, and then got straight onto the back of Bird and forced Bird unbelievably into an uncharacteristic error because Da Costa was so quick. Bird went to defend at turn 3, and unlike Bird, he gets it wrong and he crashes into the wall. And Bird being Mr. Consistent, which is completely odd to see him just crash out in the way that he crashed out. And obviously that then promoted Da Costa into second, and then he could have went on the charge, but he sort of ran out of laps. But talking about the Bird situation, I wasn't expecting maybe Bird not to put up a strong fight because Da Costa was all over him, but I wasn't expecting Bird to put it in the wall.
Yeah, I think that's, of course, you don't put it into the wall without any sort of driver error. But also the track was. I don't think I'm not sure if the track broke up in turn 3, but there were a lot of marbles offline. We saw Martin Poir crash there, we saw Stoffel Van Dorn crash there, and we saw Sam Bird crash there, and Andre Lotterer early in the race, although that maybe was not down to the marbles, but to his front wing scraping along the street.
Yeah,
Still, Sam wasn't the only one who lost it in turn 3. Um, yeah, if you get offline just slightly there, the track was either breaking up or full of marbles, and that of course meant that you lost all the grip you had, and similar to Nico Miller earlier in the race, if you miss the apex of turn 3 by a meter or two, of course you're lacking that meter or two at the exit of the corner. And what's waiting at the exit of the corner? That's right, a wall. And yeah, that's how he ended up in the wall in turn 3. So it surely was just a bit of a driver error. He saw Felix da Costa just flying, not past him, but he just, I mean, Felix da Costa had a lot better pace than Bird did. yeah, he was under pressure, of course. That maybe led to just the slightest of errors, and then once you're offline, they're still going back. And sadly, that ended his race. He was able to continue, I think, in ninth for half a lap, and then the front wing dropped and ended up under his car, and he drove into the tech
into
area
the
at the
wall.
exit of the stadium. Yeah,
Yeah, difficult race for him, and obviously then it was a race that was going so well for Virgin Racing, and obviously they could have had so many points because Bird was obviously running from P2, and then Frines, through no fault of his own, was at this stage. A bit before the race, but while Da Costa and Verne were making their way through the field, this sort of allowed them to be behind Buemi. Um, Da Costa and De Vries using their fan boost to try and overtake him, De Vries to defend, and another software glitch very similar to the Daniel App, maybe not identical but very similar, and then Daniel App completely just wipes out Frines from fourth place. So a race that was going so well for Virgin Racing, just you know through a little no fault of their own really, but Birds maybe slightly, but especially not Frines, it just came crashing down.
yeah, tough luck. That's how racing is sometimes, but it is frustrating, of course. You're running in he was fifth, I think, or fourth.
At that time I think Bird was P2 and Frines was fourth because Buemi was
Yeah.
third.
Oh, yeah, so frustrating. What else could he have done?
No, that was 30 points there they had in the bag if they stayed second and fourth, and they end up with zero.
Wrong place, wrong time. That's how it sadly is sometimes.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and it's happened before in Formula E, being in the wrong place at the wrong time. And for Frines especially, that was wrong place, wrong time.
absolutely, yeah.
Unfortunate for him. And then you mentioned on the final few laps that Van Dorn, who going into this race was championship leader, and again just doing Van Dorn things, being Mr. Consistent, like was set to finish fifth. Gotta give Alexander Sims some credit as well. Behind him and Lucas de Grassi, they struggled in qualifying, but they doing the experienced driver role really and ensuring their car was in the points. But then coming into like the final lap, Sims was all over the back of Stoffel Van Dorn, and we just seen Bird crash there, and then Van Dorn effectively does the same thing. And again, obviously Nick de Vries being out of the race after their incident with Frines, Mercedes doing a really good season. It was their first race where finally the bad luck struck them.
Yeah, not sure what else to add there. It had to happen. Any team suffers a major setback at some point throughout the year, and Mercedes will be hoping that all the bad luck they could get is now behind them, and that they can go back to normal mode in Marrakesh.
Yeah,
Um, yeah, terrible end to the day for them. I mean, it looked so good after I don't know 20 odd minutes in the race, and then yeah, being not being able to score any points with both drivers not even finishing the race. That's frustrating for them. Yeah, I don't know. Happens sometimes, I guess.
it does. It's amazing how this championship, the bad luck, it's not something like you could say in football, like you're on a bad run of form, right? It's just bad. It just comes. It just bites you. Even when you're not expecting it, it bites you. Like getting good luck in this series is actually like it's rare. I feel like there's more bad luck than there is good luck in Formula E.
Yeah, there's either normal or bad luck. There's, I mean,
There's no
of
good
course,
luck.
sometimes there's good luck, but usually you have an okay day or you have a bad day, and you have to have as many okay days as possible. Stoffel Van Dorn usually had okay days so far this season. In fact, him not scoring any points in Santiago, sorry, Mexico was the first time he didn't score anything at all this year. And now there's no driver, in fact, who was able to score in every race. He was the only one after Santiago who scored points in every race. And now after Mexico, there's no driver who is left without a 0 points finish.
And that's why he was obviously leading the standings, and that's why being consistent in Formula E is so important. And he'd still be leading the drivers' title today if he managed to finish in fifth by a couple of points, but he didn't. And it's now Mr. Mitch Evans who's leading the way. And obviously for him, just to cap off the episode and cap off the podcast, it was dominant. Ever since he managed to past Lotter into turn one, he just drove away. He checked out, which is the phrase. He checked out in Formula E terms. Not a 20-second advantage like maybe you get in other motorsport series, but in Formula E, 4 or 5 seconds, that's a checkout.
Absolutely, yeah. One of the most dominant displays I can remember in FE. We've seen a couple of really dominant races, of course. I don't know. Daniel Abt in Berlin 2018 springs to mind.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe aided by his teammate Lucas de Grassi. He was quick there as well. But certainly in the Gen 2 era of FE, that was one of the most dominant drives we've seen.
He did well, and obviously coming off the back of Santiago, where he was on again leading from the front, took pole position, and it just went backwards. The pace wasn't there. So whatever changes Jaguar have done to get that car ready for Mexico and in a position where it can dominate is a really good turnaround. So they've obviously learnt from the errors that they made in Santiago. So Marrakesh is in a couple of weeks' time. 2 weeks. Tobias, you might not be with us. Things are getting really busy for you at eForm LD, so if you're not with us, that is perfectly fine. We'll have to survive without you for a bit. Thank you so much for coming on. And obviously, please remember, if you're liking the podcast, if you're really enjoying it, we're loving the feedback and that you're giving us so far, and all the views that people are watching. It's amazing to see the podcast growing. Tobias, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me. It's always been great fun. Yeah, so thank you for the opportunity to be part of this.
No, not a problem at all. Hopefully, in the near future, when things get maybe a little bit less busy at eForm LD, you can maybe pop back on for a couple of podcasts. But for the time being, enjoy.
Thank you.
The busy time at eForm LD. I know it is busy now coming to the European season. It's all ramping up Formula E zone as well, so I understand that it's a massive time of the season now as we get closer to the European leg of the tour. So I want to say thank you very much for everyone who's been obviously listening. Please remember to like, subscribe, especially on the podcast apps. It makes a massive difference. And thank you so much for watching or listening. And I will see you very soon.
Bye-bye.